Hello all and welcome to today's virtual arena. I am hosting a very special one today because we're talking all about innovation. And joining me today is Paula from Banco Sabadell. Paula, could you give me a bit of background to yourself and your role in the venture fund side of things and at the bank?
Sure. So first of all, thank you all for having me here today. My name is Paula Blazquez. I lead the corporate venture arm or investment vehicle of Banco Sabadell, which is called InnoCells. At InnoCells, we invest in strategic startups that are either fintech or insurtech or related to the core businesses of the bank. We invest ticket sizes between 500K to 3 million. We're geography agnostic, although we have a natural bias towards the geographies where the bank operates. So that's Spain, Mexico, and the UK. Basically, we try to collaborate with all startups where we invest, and when in other startups where we haven't invested for other reasons, but we believe this is the natural steps into open innovation.
Absolutely brilliant. And it's such an exciting time to be part of that industry. So, I mean, following on from that, really, what's your day-to-day life like when it comes to trying to source this innovation?
We have a more targeted approach. So what we do at the beginning of every year, and we try to redo every 6 months, more or less, is to try and figure out what verticals are of interest for the bank. So we do a kind of a two-phased approach. We go to the market and understand, what's going on in terms of trends and where we think the bank should be positioning itself. And then we also go to the bank kind of key managers and stakeholders and understand, what are their needs. And with that, we have kind of a two-phased approach into, short-term kind of demands and long-term demands. And then from there, we start scouting startups and understanding, from a kind of a research-based approach, what are those verticals that are of most of interest for us. And then we kind of either follow a collaboration path or study a collaboration with an investment path.
Absolutely brilliant. And kind of, I guess, taking a step back to look at the industry as a whole, what do you think have been some of the biggest changes in the finance industry since the adoption of open banking? Do you think it's been more of a cultural one, or do you think really bankers are finally starting to get to grips with the technical side of things?
So I think it has been a little bit of both, and probably there's a lot of changes that are yet to be implemented. I think from a technical standpoint, one of the kind of key challenges or the key challenges have been developing an API framework for all financial institutions and enable an architecture that it's able to sustain queries from third parties, and also launching a data strategy. And then from a comparison standpoint, you can make sure that you're able to offer and demand data input so you can develop products that are more tailored to your clients. And then also on the cultural side, I guess the biggest change has been a change of mindset in terms of data ownership, where now the client is kind of the central to the data and the final owner, and the corporation is able to exploit that data for the ultimate benefit of the client. So this is about being really client centric. Being able to provide services during a customer journey, either if the customer journey sits within the traditional channels of the bank or not, and being able to adapt yourself as a financial institution to sometimes be the partner, sometimes be the manufacturer of the product, sometimes be the distributor, and deliver an open strategy that positions yourself in a way that you not only comply with PSD2, but you're able to access kind of the revenue streams that are available now through this open banking and PSD2 regulation.
Trying to gauge what is the best course of action, that must be quite an interesting dynamic. And can I ask, how long are these typical kind of collaborative approaches when it comes to fintechs? We hear a lot of challenger banks trying to do that kind of tech company, which is trying to get a new product out every kind of week, but that's just not feasible for most organizations. So what are some of the biggest challenges, or maybe even opportunities, that face financial institutions like yourselves when it comes to looking at this collaborative approach?
So I think there is a big difference between retail customers and enterprise ones. But for retail, I think what we've seen is that the barriers amongst industries have kind of broadened up. So now financial products are embedded within the kind of digital experience and have to be part of a convenient 100% digital experience. And now we're seeing finance as like the means to an end. So people see their financial provider kind of as a part of a solution to achieve their goals. These could be material ones, such as, buying a house, a car, ATV, or non-material ones, such as financial stability, which goes along with pension plans or investment solutions and things of the sort. And while with a open banking, financial institutions owned that end-to-end kind of relationship, now with open banking, you have the challenge that the bank can be kind of left with the back end or the manufacturing side only, and not being able to reach that kind of interaction with the final client, which is key. So there's a big opportunities for banks or financial institutions to decide on what grade of openness they want to play. From a platform-based approach, distributor, or even just only a provider of services. And you have the option rather to just pure comply and have this kind of limited relationship, or build a products and services alongside this new regulation, and with a new data strategy and positioning, which also gives you access to aggregation, data enrichment techniques, and customer personalization, and therefore kind of a more enriched kind of experience with the client. And then on the enterprise side, you see how enterprises are demanding more 100% digital experience, sometimes if needed, and definitely a multi-channel one. And open banking also allows to better understand the financial needs of these enterprises and understand their financial situation, which again allows for more tailored approach.
Brilliant. And that must be a really interesting part of your role. A lot of bankers, for instance, would be working just specifically on one specific part of the customer experience or a customer-facing product. But I guess in your role, you have to look out for innovation, as you said, for corporate customers all the way down to retail. What's that like?
So I guess the question here is to find a strategy that allows for kind of a strategy at two speeds. So you will have sometimes where it would make more sense to partner with a startup or a technological corporation which is already developing the product, or where you have kind of access to a specific type of information, or they've already built that interaction with the client. And this gives you a better kind of or more agile time to market. And there will be other situations where you see there is a more interesting kind of build approach. And you can do it through partnering with a startup or on your own, but definitely you have to do it in a using agile technologies and design thinking, and making sure you're building it kind of on a squad basis. So having kind of teams in place that have the knowledge both from the business side and also from tech perspective, and are able to kind of understand where the client is coming from and the client demands, and build a product offering that it's client centric, and being able to also test it with the market in a very agile way. So it's a lot about speed and understanding the final client.
I can imagine, yeah. And how does Banco Sabadell and InnoSales really look to keep up with the state of innovation when it comes to matching, for instance, some tech companies, and also regulations, especially in Europe and for instance, with Cody and over in Mexico? How can an organization of your size look to keep at the front end of the curve when it comes to innovating?
So I guess first you have to decide what strategic positioning you want to have as a financial institution, and that would involve a certain level of investment that you have to deploy to tackle that certain approach. It has to do a lot with internal culture of the financial institution and how upper management is able to seize that opportunity, and then it's able to transfer that knowledge into mid-management. So they are the ones that are able to propose use cases or partner with startups, or even product offering. So they have been the ones that kind of have that strategic and innovation thinking implemented. Then also there's a big question around being able to develop a strategy that allows for collaboration with startups, but also other big techs or other corporations. Open banking allows for that because you can have access to data pools that are sitting within other corporations or big techs. And basically, I guess you stay ahead of the curve by staying relevant to your clients, and you have to understand you're just a kind of a piece of gear within the user experience or the customer journey. And sometimes you'll be a very important piece, sometimes you'll be just a smaller one, but you have to make sure that you kind of stay greased and engaged to other pieces, and that you function within that customer experience, and you match their or exceed expectations in order not to be replaced.
I can imagine. And you brought up obviously the Payment Service Directive too a couple of times. And how do you think regulations like that are going to improve the financial industry? And as I mentioned, Cody as well. Do you think we're going to, do you think they're positive changes for Force going forward? And what do you think will be the biggest changes maybe in the next coming years?
So definitely, I think all these kind of open banking regulations allow for different kind of sources of revenue, but you just need to have the kind of the strategy in place to kind of launch those products which are on the basis of that open banking strategy. You have to decide again whether you want to be. I mean, there's a case to be made for corporations just saying, okay, I just want to comply with open banking, and I want to be kind of the back end or manufacturer of products. But of course, this is not sustainable for every financial institution. So it looks like, in the longer run, you definitely have to have an open banking strategy implemented that allows you to kind of tap into those revenue streams. And for that, you need to invest. And I think in general, financial institutions will evolve towards a more kind of platform-based model with revenue sharing propositions. A lot of them, through collaboration, as mentioned before, and entering kind of a partnerships approach. And then in terms of drivers, I guess, what we're seeing is that the financial services industry is turning its focus towards a more kind of innovation focus approach, mainly driven by technology. So we will see a lot of collaboration with fintech and that kind of partner versus build approach. I guess the increase of artificial intelligence and robotics to lower costs and increase margins would be another big trend. Financial institutions would also need to kind of redefine themselves to be more kind of agile technologies. Blockchain would definitely be kind of a key trend, speeding up underlying processes through smart contracts. And then finally, probably with COVID now, what we would see is also a speed up of trends like remote access or data security and potentially automation as well.
Definitely. And I mean, one thing that's certainly changing as a result of the Payment Service Directive is the value of payments. We're seeing increased amount of payments, but at a lower value. And obviously that brings in a lot less revenue for institutions. Where do you think banks are going to be making their money going on in the future, now that payments is less of a kind of expected revenue stream?
With payments, and big tech's also tackling kind of this industry just because it's the one that probably is the most massive with most volume one and easier to tackle, also from a regulation standpoint. But there is a lot of business and revenue streams within the core of banking, and definitely new ones coming up. But I think in general, more than one particular niche of pool of revenue, what we will see is that the financial experience have to be more of an end-to-end approach in terms of being able to facilitate finance within the customer journey that is already being built through other kind of products and services or even startups that are launching. So you have to be present from a financial product standpoint in this kind of customer experience, without sometimes having to have the client come back to you for that product in particular.
And talking more about that financial help and the customer focus that comes about from this open banking movement, what do you think in specific terms open banking will actually do to improve your customers' financial health?
Yeah, so I think we've touched base on some of them, but definitely personalization through kind of data aggregation and data enrichment techniques would allow for more kind of tailored products and services, which can even be less costly for clients, but definitely more intelligently made for them. Also, if financial wellness and sustainable approach will come out from open banking, again, because this access to data gives a more comprehensive overview of the client, even if it's an enterprise or retail, and then the 100% kind of digital customer journey with a focus on experience. One thing that I'm looking forward, or maybe hoping that happens alongside open banking regulation, is a regulation for open tech, or open banking for tech, because I think a lot of that of the data is sitting within the big techs, and I think there's a need for kind of a level playing field, but also there is a need to access these data pools and being able to aggregate that data. So then at the end of the day, that analysis of the client would be even bigger, and therefore the customization and the client relationship would be even better for everyone, for banks, for corporations, for big tech, but what's most important for the client itself.
I can imagine. And kind of speaking of that interaction between the big tech companies and the organizations, do you think that when about 5 years ago, when the challenger banks first started rolling out in quite a large amount of gusto, shall I say, there's talk of the challenger banks taking a lot of market share from the large institutions. But now we're seeing that collaborative approach, and actually it's kind of done wonders effectively for the industry. Do you think large organizations and institutions, actually the biggest competitor now is these large tech companies? We're starting to see a lot of, for instance, Google and Amazon, they already have a large amount of payment data. Do you think that's going to be an interesting dynamic going into the future because of open banking?
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a lot that we learned from challenger banks in that sense, and especially on like digital product offering. But what we've seen also is that with startups and challenger banks, there is an opportunity to collaborate, as we've mentioned. With big techs is a bit different, right? They have big pockets. They have the brand, the clientele. So I think competition is going to definitely come, and it's already coming from these big techs. And there is a question whether the world of finance have to evolve towards a more kind of collaborative approach between big techs and finance, and again ensure kind of that we keep that user experience and level of personalization that open banking and other regulations offer. Also, I think in general, the big question with the big techs, and this is not only coming from myself, but what I hear from different clients is in terms of data security and the use of that data. So I think the Googles, Apples of the world, they've managed to kind of use that data in ways that sometimes the client would not be loving to give it away. So we have to find in general in a way to kind of allow the client to decide on how they want to use their data and how they want different corporations to exploit it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think banks are also in a really good position because everyone has a bank, and not a lot of people change them, whereas I'll very easily move to a different search provider if I don't want to use Google. So I definitely think that's an interesting role that the banks have. As you mentioned, that trust aspect. I think, that's going to be so important going into the future. But speaking of the future, just to wrap up, I'm going to give you a really quite a difficult question, and I don't think anyone will criticize if it doesn't end up being exactly true. But looking to the next couple of years, what do you think are going to be some of the key digital trends that people in finance are really excited about? And I'm speaking more on a kind of retail banking side. What do you think your customers are going to see from banks going in the future and never imagine banking without it again?
I think in terms of tech trends, definitely artificial intelligence and robotics would be a huge game changer. Because overall in the whole kind of finance play and also insurance, we will see how you're able to kind of lower that cost and increase those margins and in general automate the whole kind of value chain and process. So that would, require a lot of like tech investment from financial institutions and other corporations. Blockchain would be also a big trend in terms of speeding up processes through smart contracts for sure. And then one big one that we have to watch out on, which is not that retail based, but definitely would have an impact in our lives, is cybersecurity and making sure that we have a data security strategy in place that is able to kind of handle that amount of data, automated, as I mentioned before, and then being able to secure it, because the amount of data pools that every corporation is building is just enormous. So we have to make sure that that data is secure.
I can completely imagine. And I guess it's one of those things where it's a never-ending chase, because as the criminals get smarter, obviously so do the banks and so does the technology. So that should be really interesting. Well, Paula, thank you very much for joining me here today on the FinTech Finance Virtual Arena. You can catch the rest of our episodes at www.fintechf.com and, of course, YouTube. And to all our viewers, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week.